Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going over the New Deal, FDR's plan to end the Great Depression and get America moving again. We'll talk about what all it was, what all went into it, talk about the effects of it, and how it changes the United States. I'm also going to talk about some of the New Deal programs. When we get there, I'm going to be going through them as quickly as I can. That way we hopefully can end this video as soon as possible, because I know, even though y'all probably love hearing my voice, and we all know you hit mute and you just click through, right? All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So, the New Deal. What is the New Deal? The New Deal was Franklin Roosevelt's, FDR's, plan to end the Great Depression. Okay, just as a side note, if you're in a history class and you have some kind of timed writing, when you see Franklin Roosevelt, instead of writing Franklin Roosevelt, just write FDR. Probably your teacher is going to be okay with that. I know English says you got to write the whole thing out first. FDR, everybody in U.S. history knows who you're talking about. Anyway, his plan to end the Depression is the New Deal. What is it? It's all organized around what he called the 3 R's. Relief, providing help to people immediately, getting them jobs, getting them money. Reform, fixing the problems that led to the Great Depression. That's going to involve new laws, new regulations to make sure that something like this, hopefully, can never happen again. And finally, recovery. The things that are designed to get the economy moving again, to get our economy growing, and to get us officially out of the Great Depression. Some of the highlights of FDR's presidency, there is this period of time that we call now the 100 days. That's the first just over 3 months of FDR's presidency. The reason it's such a big deal is because after his inauguration, he essentially says, all right, let's get to work. And they start moving to try to enact different programs and laws and agencies and whatever else to deal with the Great Depression immediately. And so there's an awful lot of changes that occurred during this 100 days. And as a result, every president since, at the end of their first 100 days in office, the news media likes to evaluate, okay, what have they done? How much have they done that they said they were going to do? And what is the value of the things that they've done during this 100 days? And for some people, they say, okay, if you don't get it done in the first 100 days, you're not getting it done. All right, so one of the first things he does is he declares a bank holiday. And that's kind of a big deal. What he does, he requires all banks to close because that's one of the things that contributed to the Great Depression, the failure of these banks. What the government's going to do for the few days that these banks are closed is they're going to go in, they're going to audit the banks and determine which ones the government considers to be safe. All banks will then reopen, some of which will have a certificate from the government saying, hey, we think that this one's okay. The whole point of that is to restore confidence in the banking system. Now, if you are the American public and you're worried about your bank closing and FDR walks in and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to close all the banks. You might be freaked out by that. So FDR does this thing over and over again in his presidency called the fireside chat. He sits down with the radio broadcasts and broadcasts directly to the American people. He's not relying on the news media to take a soundbite from a speech he gives. He's instead giving it to you, and he's giving it to you straight. The whole reason is to reassure people. And he uses these over and over and over again during his presidency, which is going to extend into World War II, to tell the people, here's what I'm doing. Here's why you don't need to panic. All right, these New Deal programs. Okay, after I post this video on YouTube, I'm going to try to link to a handout, if I can, that you can use. Okay, so if you're in my class, I'm telling you right now, don't write down these programs. I'm going to give you something. Okay? If you need more time on these, feel free to hit that pause button. But I'm trying to get this thing done as quickly as possible because there's a lot of stuff in the New Deal. This cartoon right here kind of sums up what FDR is going to do with these New Deal programs. If you look there on the table, you got sitting next to Uncle Sam, who looks pretty sick. all these different medicines. And FDR's over there saying, look, if this doesn't fix it, we'll try something else. We'll get rid of the things that don't work. We'll keep the things that do work. But we're going to try things until they work. So here we go. The New Deal programs. I've got them up here. I've kind of organized them in my own little categories. The first category is financial programs. First financial program was the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Okay, this is the one that after FDR closes the banks, Congress is going to pass this and says that the healthy banks are going to be given more credit by the Federal Reserve. They'll be given more access to cash so that they can remain financially solvent. Second one up here is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC. You may have seen this logo at your local bank. What this is, the banks buy insurance from the government, and that insurance provides for your account if, God forbid, that bank were to close. Your money is now safe and sound, unlike at the beginning of the Great Depression when if a bank closed, your money's just gone. Third one up here is the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is created to help regulate the stock market to make sure that the companies that trade on the stock market are providing accurate information to the investors who might want to buy. Our next set of programs are the industrial programs. These were designed to really help industry out. Okay, the National Industrial Recovery Act. That's the big one. It set the codes of fair competition that all industries had to follow. Okay, things like for food, what goes into food? Because if I'm trying to make more money, I might, I don't know, put some sawdust in there with the mashed potatoes. This says, no, you can't do that. Everybody's got to play by the rules. It's also for consumer protection, obviously, with my example there. Part of the NIRA is the National Recovery Administration. That's the thing that's actually going to take care of the codes and whatever else. The NRA is designed to stimulate industry, to help those industries recover. One of the things it did is it helped keep wages and prices stable. It was going to help set those wages and set prices so that, somebody couldn't come and undercut the competition. So you couldn't have somebody, working for less, thus hurting wages around the country. Now, it's important to note that participation in the NRA by industries and businesses was voluntary. But there was an awful lot of social pressure to participate. If you didn't hang the Blue Eagle in your window, people would boycott your business. And so, even though it's voluntary, it's almost required. All right, aid programs. Things are just designed to help people out. The first one up here, probably the most important one, is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, also known as the AAA. This one is designed to help farmers, and it's going to pay farmers to not produce. So you're paying farmers to sit there. The idea behind this is it will lower the supply. That will cause prices for those farm products to go up, and that's ultimately going to help farmers out. This is probably the most controversial of the New Deal programs because when it's enacted, we have millions of people in the country that are starving. And FDR is saying we're going to produce less food. Now, no one is going to starve to death because of this program. Even though we produce less food, we are still producing enough to take care of everyone. Those people that are out of work and starving, food banks are still going to have access to food. What this is going to do is just going to raise the prices. It's also controversial because by the time this one's passed, planting and breeding season has already occurred. So at the very beginning, they're paying farmers to destroy crops and destroy livestock. Okay, this picture right here shows you cows that have been slaughtered out there on the prairie in order to reduce supply. Next one up there is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. This one helped refinance homes and help provide low-interest loans so people could keep their homes out of foreclosure. Our next set are work programs, and I've got a number of these work programs. The first one is the Civilian Conservation Corps. It is designed to help out young men between the ages of 18 and 25. Most of them went and worked in the national forest or on the national parkland, trying to do conservation and protection of natural resources. They laid out campsites. They built roads through the national parks. Many things that are still with us today were done by the CCC. This one is also considered to be the most successful of the New Deal agencies. Millions of men go through this program, and it's finally shut down in 1942 once the Great Depression is actually over. But they did a lot of good work. Next up here is the Public Works Administration. This one was just designed to finance a huge series of government projects that built buildings and infrastructure all around the country. Now, this one gave the building contracts to private companies. And those private companies then were supposed to turn around and hire people. And so this was an indirect form of aid. Okay. A side note here, my grandmother's uncle, whatever he is to me, he owned a road construction company here in Texas, and he got PWA funds to build roads throughout the state of Texas. It's something that was needed. He got the money from the government. He then paid the employees with that government money. Okay. Another work project is the Civil Works Administration. It's basically like the PWA, construction projects for public infrastructure. The difference here is the government managed the projects. It was decided that the PWA was a little too inefficient because you had to, there's red tape and you had to find a company, and then that company had to find employees. So the government's going to manage the projects. The government's going to hire the workers directly. This one is up and running for 6 months, and it gets shut down because it spent $500 million. And FDR got a little worried about inflation at one point. The last of the work programs I've got up here is the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. This one built more public projects. They would do stuff in the public parks as well. Okay, one of the things that they did within Texas is, if you've been to Dallas and you've been to a place called Fair Park, many of the buildings in Fair Park, like the one I've got here close to the center, were designed by the architects who worked for the WPA because it hired people to use their skills. Over on the right, there's a series of post offices down in South Texas where they hired artists to go in and paint murals. And so the murals reflect the local culture, economy, whatever else in that area. And so this one depicted cotton farmers. Right? Now, one of the most probably famous WPA projects is the creation of Mount Rushmore. Okay, again, artists using their talents to create things. But the WPA also has things called make work projects. Make work projects in school, you might be familiar with something called busy work, just giving people something to do. That's what the make work projects were. We can't just hand people money. FDR didn't want to do that. So instead, what they did is they hired people to rake up all the leaves in the city park. And then they paid them. And tomorrow you came back and you raked all those leaves over to the other side of the park, and then they paid you. You've got to do something to get some money. All right, to protect workers, there's going to be 2 laws that are passed. The first one is the National Labor Relations Board. Okay, National Labor Relations Board guarantees the rights of the workers to unionize. It also created something called binding arbitration. The National Labor Relations Board will sit down with the business and the workers, the 2 parties, listen to what each one of them wants, and then the government, which is supposed to be neutral, will decide what the solution is, what the compromise is, and binding arbitration. If you agree to binding arbitration, you agree to live by whatever the government comes up with. The next one is the Fair Labor Standards Act. Fair Labor Standards Act sets the minimum wage, which I believe when it was created is 10 cents an hour. It set the 40-hour work week. Anything over 40 hours is overtime. And then it also banned child labor under the age of 16, which, the progressives were trying to do way back in the early 1900s. Okay, that one's still with us. Anytime you see an increase in the minimum wage, that's going to require an amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay. Finally, the last of our big important New Deal programs, public utilities, the creation of this thing called the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA, seen here in my map. The TVA built dams in and around the Tennessee Valley, and those dams functioned to control flooding, but also to help provide electricity to the area, because the area is very rural, and a lot of electric companies at that time did not provide electricity to the rural areas because it just wasn't financially worth it to them. The TVA will. And then most importantly, of course, the TVA creates jobs. Okay, so it's providing a couple different things in the 3 R's. Okay, Now that we're done with the programs, some of the stuff that FDR does that's not necessarily related to getting us out of the Depression. Some of the stuff is more political. So he puts together something called the New Deal Coalition. FDR wanted to create a permanent group of people who would vote Democrats, groups that could always be relied on to consistently vote Democrat. And so to do this, his New Deal programs, many of them are specifically designed to help out different minority groups, to put minorities into leadership positions. Okay. Those minorities, okay, included women, African Americans, Native Americans. They're going to obviously create things to help out the working class. And then they also tried to include some business interests in this. Some of these New Deal programs, could have been quite radical and transformational, but maybe business didn't want it, so maybe they didn't go as far as they could have. Okay, but FDR's goal is to make these people vote Democrat, and even today in 2025, even though we're starting to see some cracks in this, basically, if you can look at some of these demographic groups, you can guarantee they're going to vote Democrat. Okay? One of the faces of the New Deal Coalition is a lady named Frances Perkins. She's going to be the Secretary of Labor. She's the first woman to be in the cabinet. Okay. Then we also have Mary McLeod Bethune. She's the first African American to lead a government agency. And she led a government agency called the Negro National Youth Administration. They helped people who were in high school work in addition to going to school. Okay. Now, there are people who are opposed to the New Deal. And weirdly enough, FDR, who would be considered to be a liberal, faces opposition from liberals over the New Deal. Why are they opposed to it? It's not that they're opposed to it. They think he's not doing enough. They think he's being too conservative. And so they say the New Deal could be doing more. One of these people is a guy named Father Charles Coughlin. And another side note, I kind of really didn't know where to put him. I decided to put him over here in the liberal group because he does call for nationalization of certain major industries. But also, Charles Coughlin is going to be, um, he's just to the left of being a fascist. Uh, he had a radio program, he had a very large following, and he ended up being kicked off the air because ultimately of his praise for some of the things Hitler was doing in Germany and some of the fascist ideas that were taking over in Europe. So next guy up here, definitely a liberal, Huey Long. Huey Long's a Democrat, but Huey Long probably more like a socialist. He calls for redistribution of wealth. He believed there needed to be a cap on a limit on how much personal fortune one person could have, and everything above that limit needed to be redistributed to people that didn't have anything. He called this the Share Our Wealth program. Huey Long was very popular, especially among working class and the poor, because he promised that if this was enacted, he was going to get them money and he's going to stick it to those rich people. He was popular enough that there was talk that in 1936, at the end of FDR's first term, when we're still in the Depression, and maybe it doesn't seem like it's getting any better, there was talk that he was going to challenge FDR for the Democratic nomination. That ended up not happening for two reasons. One, the economy does seem like it's starting to get a little bit better, and two, Huey Long was assassinated. Okay? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just something that happens. Okay? The third person that criticizes FDR for not doing enough is a guy named Dr. Francis Townsend. Okay? He had a lot of elderly patients, and those people had trusted banks. They put their money in the banks, and the banks failed, and now they didn't have anything. And now you have all these New Deal programs that are designed to help working people. And these are people that were no longer working. Francis Townsend said, you forgot about these folks. Like, they can't take advantage of your New Deal programs. That one FDR actually listens to, and we're going to create something called Social Security. And so he did adopt Townsend's ideas and created Social Security. Okay, Social Security is an old age pension. In theory, you may already know that, but it does more than that. Okay, it also helps provide unemployment insurance. Your Social Security taxes go to pay for that. It also provides pensions for people who are disabled and therefore cannot work. This isn't the temporary workman's compensation or anything like that. This is you are physically or mentally disabled and unable to hold a job. Okay? And then lastly, and hopefully this does not apply to any of you, it also helps provide a pension for children who are orphans. Okay, if one parent passes away, children under the age of 18 can get a monthly check because the government says, look, somebody should be providing for you, and that person is no longer able to do that. Now, of course, conservatives are going to oppose the New Deal. Their argument is, of course, that it went too far. The conservative argument against the New Deal said that these new regulations, these new codes, actually hurt business and therefore also hurt economic growth. There is an electric company in the American Southeast that ends up being put out of business by the TVA. The TVA is producing electricity. This private company is producing electricity, but the TVA was selling it for less than what it cost the TVA to produce the electricity. The TVA could operate at a loss because it can make up for that with federal taxes. The private company couldn't, and so as cities started canceling contracts to get electricity from the TVA, that private company started going out of business and ended up actually being bought out by the TVA. Conservatives also said that these new regulations violated individuals' rights to negotiate with business. Who are you to say I have to work for a minimum wage? What if I want to work for 8 cents an hour? You should have the right to do that. Don't do that. That's dumb. Finally, conservatives argued this was also giving the government too much power. A lot of the things that the government takes over during the New Deal were powers that the state governments and the local governments had always done and always taken care of. The Great Depression was just different. They couldn't handle a lot of these problems, and so the federal government stepped in to take on that. But conservatives are going to say, look, you're doing too much. That's best done at the state and local level. Okay? And then also the executive branch expanding its control. Okay? Each one of these agencies didn't report to Congress, they reported to the president. And so the president is amassing more and more and more power. Now, in 1937, there's going to be something called the Roosevelt recession. Here we are in the middle of a depression, a huge economic downturn, and we're going to have a recession, a minor economic downturn. In January of 37, FDR, after implementing all the New Deal programs, all these New Deal programs for the last 4 years, says, okay, we need to start actually cutting government spending. Why? Because he's worried about inflation. Government is spending tons and tons of money, and how bad would it be if in the middle of the Depression you also had rampant inflation? So he says we need to cut spending. Okay, not actually a bad idea if that's what you're trying to do. Problem is, January of 1937 is also when the government first started collecting Social Security taxes. Social Security taxes are paid by business and it's paid by workers as they take that out of your paycheck. When business and workers no longer had as much money, they then didn't spend as much money. So you have lower spending by government, business, and consumers. And so what ends up happening is GDP declines. The gross domestic product declines. There's economic contraction. If you look at the business cycles from 1929 to 1945, the darker purple in the negative areas, okay, you see right as you enter 1937, all of a sudden you see lower GDP, negative economic growth. That's the Roosevelt recession. Okay, only like 7 million people lost their jobs, which is 7 million more than you wanted. Okay, in order to deal with that issue, FDR just said, "Oh well, okay, well if 3 entities can't cut spending, we'll just have the government increase spending to hopefully get everything back on track." Now, the courts are also going to be opposed to some of the New Deal programs. Okay, the Supreme Court is going to find 2 programs unconstitutional. Probably the most important of the court cases is Schechter versus U.S. Okay, the Schechter brothers operate a poultry business, and so sometimes this is called the sick chicken case. You can go look for the details, but essentially what happens is the Schechter brothers sold diseased chickens. And so the government came in, and they said, you can't do that, and they fined them. The Schechter brothers sued, saying, look, we operate only within the state of New York. And it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules that the NIRA, that program that sets the codes of fair competition that said you can't sell sick or diseased chickens, is actually unconstitutional. Why? Because it regulated all business. And the Constitution says the government, the national government, can only regulate interstate commerce, business between two or more states. The Schechter brothers only operated within the state of New York, which made them intra-state commerce. The other court case is Butler versus U.S. This one's very simple. It ruled the AAA to be unconstitutional. Essentially, you were taxing one small group and using the proceeds to give to one small group. And they said you can't do that. That's unfair taxation and unfair then spending. To solve this, they just created the second AAA, fixing the taxing and spending issues. But that was a big deal. At the courts finding FDR's programs to be unconstitutional, he said, they don't understand what I'm trying to do. He started referring to them as the 9 old men. And so FDR came up with this thing we call the court packing plan, his plan to fix the Supreme Court and get them to start having a more, as he would say, favorable interpretation of laws. Some of you might say a more liberal interpretation of those laws and of the Constitution. What he proposed was to add one more justice to the Supreme Court for each member that was 70 years old or older, with a maximum of adding 6 people to the Supreme Court. If you know there's 9 people on the Supreme Court right now, that would involve there being 15 people on the Supreme Court. This particular cartoonist didn't like that idea. Here's FDR's expanded Supreme Court. He's not the only one that didn't like it. Congress didn't like it either. Congress actually sets the number of seats on the Supreme Court. And so when FDR says, here's what I want to do, Congress told him no. This is the first big thing that FDR put the full weight of the presidency behind, that Congress said, no, we're not doing this. Their argument was that it gave the executive branch too much power, violating the ideas of separation of powers. If the executive branch has that much control over the judicial branch, checks and balances is out the window. Okay? Because he wanted this, and because it is seen as a violation of separation of powers, there are people in Congress who became more and more opposed to what FDR was doing. And I'm not just talking about Republicans who are naturally going to be opposed to him. I'm also talking about within the Democratic parties. People start saying, the Republicans are worried you're taking too much power. Maybe you are. Okay? Now, it's not going to matter. He's going to end up replacing 7 of those justices anyway. Okay? But because of the court packing plan, the court does start drifting a little bit more his way. Okay? All right, ultimately, the impact of the New Deal. What are the effects of the New Deal? Okay, let's talk about the political effects first. Politically, Democrats are going to start focusing on and appealing to working class voters, trying to do things and saying they're doing things that are designed to help the working class. They're also, and even though this has been done kind of off and on, they're also going to start using more and more attacks on the business and the wealthy to motivate the working class voters. Okay? You see it pretty often in elections. Why is it that this group doesn't have? Because that group has. Okay? We sometimes call this class warfare. Okay? The reason you're poor is because somebody else is rich. Okay? That's a thing that a lot of Democrats continue to use. Okay? They're also going to see the political effects of this because of the New Deal coalition. Those different minority groups are going to start breaking more and more toward the Democratic Party. FDR's idea of I'm going to put together a New Deal coalition worked. Okay, like I said, demographically, if you're a woman, you are more likely to vote Democrat. If you're African American, you're more likely to vote Democrat. 100% guarantee. If you're a working class, up until the last maybe 20 years, I would say you are definitely more likely to vote Democrat. We're starting to see some shifts, but that means this has lasted for about 100 years. That's crazy how powerful that was. Okay? And the political effects, FDR was elected to 4 terms. Okay? The 2-term tradition exists until FDR. It will be enshrined with the 22nd Amendment after FDR, but FDR did get elected to 4 terms. Also politically, partly because of FDR running for the 3rd term, partly because of some of the economic things that FDR does. Conservative Democrats are going to start leaving the party. They're going to start shifting over into the Republican Party. A lot of those are Southern Democrats. And we also can't take out the racial ideas. FDR sought to include African Americans and sought to alleviate the problems associated with segregation and discrimination. Conservative Democrats, Southern Democrats, did not support that. Southern Democrats do not support civil rights. And so they're going to start slowly drifting over into the Republican Party. Okay? We'll see way more of that in the 1960s. All right, socially, the New Deal was a great thing. It strengthened our people's faith in democracy and our people's faith in our form of government. Okay? In Europe, that was not the case. In Europe, people drifted toward communism. In Germany, we know they drifted toward fascism. The people gave up the idea of democracy. We want one person to tell us all what to do, and we're going to follow him. And we know that was wrong, and that led to untold disasters in Europe with the Holocaust, with World War II. But not here. We said we're going to believe in democracy. We're going to believe that government is going to take care of us. And because of this, we now view government as a safety net. Government provides assistance to us and protects us from horrible economic consequences. If you end up unemployed, there is unemployment insurance. The government does things to hopefully keep our economy on track and move our economy in the right direction. Economically, the New Deal did not end the Depression. It helped. It got many people back to work. It stimulated some industry, but it is not the thing that fully ended the Great Depression. We see this with unemployment still being high. You had the Roosevelt recession in 1938, okay, roughly 10 years after the Great Depression started. Unemployment is still at 18%. Okay? 1940, unemployment is still at 14%. Okay? Those that were employed may not have a job that's paying at the same level that they were making before the Great Depression. And so the Depression continued to linger. There are many scholars nowadays who are looking at the New Deal and evaluating the New Deal and saying it may have actually lengthened the Great Depression because of the restraints that it put on business, kept them from fully being able to recover. The thing that's ultimately going to end the Great Depression is World War II. When Europe goes to war and Europe is going to need weapons, businesses in the United States are going to begin to do that, and they're going to begin to hire people. And so that's where we're going to see all of a sudden the New Deal, the Great Depression starts to end as more people go back to work to feed the Allies in Europe during World War II. And then, of course, once we join. All right. Hopefully you were able to digest all that. Hopefully I went through that quickly. Hopefully you understand a little bit more about the significance of the New Deal. Thanks for watching.